All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is, as always, Panayota Pavlopoulos. I'm here as the Training and Education Advocate at Turning Point of Lehigh Valley. With us today, we're going to start a little bit. We have kind of a nice guest with us that was unexpected, so I'm happy to join. But we have Marlena Flora, who is here with us as our Legal Advocacy Director here at Turning Point, as well as Jess Murphy, who is another one of our legal advocates. And hopefully shortly joining us as well will be Kate Collett, who is the Northampton County Assistant District Attorney. I misspoke and said she was from Lehigh County, but she is from Northampton County. But yeah, so we are excited to kind of get into the conversation of, discussing legal advocacy, how to break through barriers, and really navigate the legal system. One quick, or a couple quick notes before we really get into it. Number one, there will be a feedback survey at the end of the conversation. It will appear in your window, so when you complete it, if you can complete it, we would really appreciate it. That feedback really helps us kind of continue to develop our further educational offerings. We will also have a certificate of attendance available for you, so that will be available in the follow-up email tomorrow. And then out of confidentiality and for the safety and just support of others and their privacy, we do ask that you don't share any personally identifying information, especially about anyone else, but also about ourselves. If you do have any specific questions or anything, granted specifically in the legal system, it's kind of hard to give individual answers over this sort of group webinar, but you can always call our helpline 610-437-3369 if you have any specific legal questions, or we'll kind of cover the general questions and discussion points throughout the conversation today. So feel free to type in the chat. Feel free to ask with the Q&A feature. But before we really begin, I'm going to ask one quick question and ask, where are you from? Where are you joining us from? So on your screen, you should have a quick pop-up feature, and the options are Lehigh County, Northampton County, another county within PA, or even outside of PA, if we have anyone joining us from outside. But we're happy either way that you're here. I'll give it another minute or so. Okay. So we'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1. It looks like we're at a nice mix. We have about half and half, Lehigh County, Northampton County. So we're happy to have you all from our area. So that being said, I'm gonna ask, can you introduce yourselves? So I gave you a little bit, but can you tell me a little bit about what you do? What brought you to this work? What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, my name is Marlena Flora. I'm the Legal Advocacy Director with Turning Point of Lehigh Valley, and I have the privilege of directing and supervising the legal advocates. And we have we work out of satellite offices. We have an office in Lehigh County Courthouse, which is on Hamilton Street in Allentown, and we have an office that we work out of in Northampton County Courthouse, which is in Easton. And we help survivors navigate the criminal and civil justice systems. And it's a privilege to do so. And so that is what I do. Jess is with us today. She's one of our legal advocates, and I'll have her tell a little bit about herself.
So I'm Jess. I am one of the legal advocates. I can't talk today. I'm sorry. So I work out of both counties. So I'm back and forth. I pop in, I pop out. I'm everywhere. What I do, the main focus in our job is helping through the PFA process. That's our main thing that we do. We're there to walk you through that entire process in both counties. And then we also, like Marlena said, help with navigating the criminal system. That can be super scary for a lot of people. well, both PFA and criminal can be scary for you coming in, because a lot of times it's your first time ever in the courthouse, first time ever in court, and we're just here to help guide you through that with a friendly face and some options that you have.
So you mentioned PFA, and I know in our world that's a pretty common acronym, but can you explain kind of what is a PFA and what we do there?
Okay, well, a PFA is a protection from abuse. So it's something that you need to have some sort of relationship with the person to be able to file. A lot of people know them as a restraining order. Pennsylvania doesn't have a restraining order anymore. They just have the protection from abuse. And there's other protections that depend on certain circumstances that you can file for as well. But this is, you come in, you write down what happened. You'll go up in front of the judge, explain to the judge what happens. Judge makes their decision whether to grant the order, not grant the order. And then from there, there's different paths that we have to take to walk you through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And we work in both systems. We work in both the criminal and the civil. The civil, that's where the protection from abuse order comes in. It's under the civil. And then there's, if criminal charges were pressed, we walk through that process as well, supporting survivors, from the preliminary hearing all the way to a sentencing. We work very closely with both counties, family court, PFA offices, and the district attorney's office. So having that relationship that we've built, it's on mutual respect. It's been very beneficial in assisting survivors of domestic violence who are coming through the system, because there's that open communication. So we're able to, again, better assist them with hearings that may be continued, or plea agreements and whatnot. But again, that's working with both offices, district attorney and family court, walking through that with our clients.
Right. So I know one of the things, at least for me, so I actually didn't start, we were just talking about this. I didn't start in this work, as I don't think really any of us exactly did. We all kind of seem to find our way to this work for some reason or another. And, I think one of the challenges in mind is understanding the difference between, like, okay, so we have a temporary, we have a final, or, can you explain kind of that process of, if I'm a survivor and, I do want a protection order with, my abuser or family member or whoever it is, like, how do I walk me through the process? What does that look like? How can I do that?
Just, you want to explain that process from
No
when they
pressure.
come in? No, I'm glad you asked that question. Jess actually right now is in Northampton County. So that's really where it would start from a temporary on, if you want to go through that quickly, Jess.
No, absolutely. So the temporary process is you come into the courthouse, you'll go to the PFA office. Northampton County has their own separate PFA office. Lehigh County is just the family court office on the fourth floor. Come in, there's some paperwork that you need to fill out. Usually first set of paperwork is like identifying information for you and for the person you're filing against, so that the sheriffs know who they're going to be serving, who to look for, things like that. Second set of paperwork is you're going to answer some questions. One of the questions is, when was the most recent incident of abuse? So they want like a date, time, rough estimates, of course, because you're not going to be like, oh, I looked at the clock. No, rough estimate, morning, evening, roughly about what time, and then write down what happened. It doesn't need to be like full detail, like this and then this and then this, just a general summary, but you don't want to put just like, I was abused or threatened. You need like specifics, like you were hit, you were, he said he was going to hit me, he said he was going to kill me, things like that. Um, and then another question is past incidents of abuse, which would be anything they usually say 2 months or more. We have people come in, you're in a relationship for 20, 30 years sometimes, and it's just been bad, and they're coming in now filling out the paperwork. So that can be a little bit more generalized.
When you say the 2 months or more, do you mean 2 months or more of the relationship?
No, just abuse.
Oh, okay.
Like,
just
so the incident that brought you in, like the most recent, they want the most recent incident, and then like the last 2 months.
Okay. Like
And
what has
then
been going on over that time, but
yeah. And then the next question could be anything from the past of the entire relationship.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'd like to add too, with the protection from abuse, it is the judges are guided by the law. And so typically PFAs are granted if there's physical abuse. But what's important to know though, that there is a threat. So if there's a threat of harm, if you're fearful for your life, even if there's no physical abuse, I would still always encourage to come in and to apply for a PFA. We've seen them granted many times without the physical component, but yet there's that real threat, especially if your life is being threatened and you're being stalked.
Yeah. Stalking is another huge factor.
Absolutely.
I've heard the quote where they say, stalking is homicide in slow motion, which
Oh
is
yeah.
terrifying to hear, but it's a real factor that a lot of times if somebody has that, evidence of stalking, that a lot of times it does end up becoming that lethality risk or concern. But you're right. There's a, statistic in 2022, 88% of temporary PFAs, so when somebody goes to the courthouse and is trying to, first file, in the state of PA were granted, so 88% of them. So, odds are, again, like you said, if there is that physical abuse, physical violence, or even that threat of harm to your physical well-being, right? Odds are that you're getting, that support in whatever way that you need. I know that one of the biggest myths, I guess, or criticisms of a protection order often tends to be, well, it's just a piece of paper, right? So can you talk a little bit more about kind of the benefit of filing for a protection order and, why we encourage it?
So it is just a piece of paper. Okay. But it's also there is some meat behind that piece of paper. And so especially we talked about stalking, but there are violations of PFA that are upheld. I will say that in both counties, the judges that we've seen and worked with do hold accountable for violations of PFAs. So the initial one usually is a fine, but I've been in hearings where it's concerning. It's very concerning when somebody orders a legal document that's just a piece of paper that people call it. But again, it allows law enforcement to act if it's violated in any way, whether it's a phone call, they're outside your house, you call 911. It's different when you have that PFA. If somebody is out parked outside across the street. If I call now and say, to the police, my boyfriend's parked across the street, there's not much law enforcement can do with that, right? They may come, talk to them, say, just, leave. But again, with a protection from abuse order, an actual legal document, they can make an arrest. They can move on that.
Yep.
And so, or, definitely file a contempt of court in which they come in and file that contempt and their first offense. And then as it moves up, the fines are heftier, but there's also, where we now go into the criminal court system because of the violations. And so I've personally have seen defendants arrested and
Mhm.
having to serve jail time for their second and third offenses.
Right.
So it is just a piece of paper. It is.
Mhm.
Do those pieces of paper save lives? Not always, but they can. It is a document, a law document that can be acted on. And it helps to gauge too, I think, the offender and the level of, shows you where their head's at. Again, anybody that's, willing to violate an order
Mhm.
is a dangerous person.
Yeah.
And so again, it allows the law to act on that and hold them accountable.
One what's the right word? Metaphor that I've heard is it's almost like car insurance, right? Yes, car insurance is a piece of paper, but at the
Right.
same time, if you're in an accident, you don't want to be caught without it, right? You want to make sure that you have that legal document, that
Yes.
financial aspect to protect you from further harm, further danger, further, fines, whatever the case might be. So, yes, it really does help start that paper trail and kind of support the survivor ultimately.
Right.
Um, from the abuser standpoint, I guess, what limitations are put on the abuser when the protection order is put in place? Like, what does that, how does that, and I don't know if maybe this was kind of mentioned, but, um, like a lot of times, I actually was able to shadow the legal team and, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting her name, but the judge in Lehigh court would always say like, okay, now you know that when this is put in place, this is what
Yeah.
you can do, this is what you cannot do.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you want to kind of explain what that looks like.
Well, first and foremost, and you can speak somewhat to this also, Jess, but first and foremost, if they have weapons, they are confiscated.
Mhm.
So that's first and foremost, by the sheriff's department. But also the judge will go over exactly what no contact is. So no contact means indirect, not just direct, but indirect, because that's real popular, the indirect.
Yep.
Um, Social media, and they go over to make sure that they understand that this is what you're being told you cannot do. I don't know if you want to speak to any other, Jess. I know for me, social media was always big. Obviously, the weapons, and the indirect contact. I feel like I'm just glad that over the years that's really, really explained because that's a popular form to continue to reach out and you know, try to get in touch with the survivor.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the contact. So most places it's no contact whatsoever. So you can't be where the person is, where they could potentially be. So like say a person goes to the same restaurant on a Tuesday,
Mhm.
goes bowling. We've had people be banned from a bowling alley
Mhm.
during time. Um, Church,
Mhm.
school, work, they can't physically show up there or most of the time even call there.
Mhm.
And then,
Due to the survivor being there.
yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I imagine even, within workplace settings as well, that if you
Yeah.
have a cafe, right, that your abuser cannot show up or call your workplace or things along those lines, right?
Mhm. And we've
So,
had a few judges who specifically wrote that in there that
hmm
um, the offender could not call the
hmm hmm I know that the no contact, you know, can be really beneficial in these circumstances, but sometimes it's also not entirely feasible. For example, in the case of if kids are involved with both parties, so what are some of the things that maybe you've seen that a judge might warrant as far as contact in those instances if kids are involved, but there's still a protection order in place?
Usually when there's kids involved, they allow either text,
Mm-hmm.
email, or like those the different communication apps that they have, like Our Family Wizard and things like that, that usually custody court orders. Those are it. They don't want any verbal communication. They just want written communication so it can be monitored by the court.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's only supposed to be, I'm picking up the child at this time, I'm running late to pick up the kid, like different things like that. Just specific about logistical matters of the child, not health matter. I mean, if there's an emergency, they allow that, but not like, I don't think you're feeding the kid the right food, things like that. No, it's just moving the kids around, and if there's an emergency.
Yeah.
So I see where judges are pretty good again in our counties, in my experience, with being very detailed
Mm-hmm.
in the arrangement in the PFA. So we have many clients we work with that their exchanges are done at the local police department.
Mm,
Um,
that's a
but
good idea.
judges always encourage, well, they always encourage heavily to take this to custody court. So
Mhm.
what they're putting in place is temporary
Mhm.
while the protection order is in place, but it's always encouraged to go through custody through the family court office and have them work that out.
Yeah.
But what the judge writes in place, um, only a custody order can supersede that. But then again, if there's a custody order and there were some abuses going on, a judge can also supersede that until it goes to a final hearing.
This is why I love the legal conversation, because there are so many nuances to every single
Mm.
scenario, right? That, in one case, something might happen, in another case, it might be a completely different scenario. But again, that is sort of you know, the importance of having a legal advocate or somebody kind of on your side and guiding you through that process, helping answer questions, helping, really understand the nuances of what are your rights, what are the things that you can or can't do in this case. You
Yeah,
know,
that's what I was going to say. That's the beauty. That's why advocacy is so great, and it's always challenging, and it's always evolving, because you can come to every situation is unique,
yeah.
and so just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean
Hmm.
there doesn't have to be a new precedent, and it's like let's ask, let's push it, and again, that's the importance in building relationships within both the criminal and civil justice system as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so, that's again advocacy. That's where our roles do come in,
Mm.
because I know if I had to go in for a PFA, I would be nervous, and I work in the court system. Not to mention all the stress and abuse and everything that's going on at home. It's hard to even think straight, right? And then to make that choice to walk into the courthouse is a big step. And so again, that's why we see it as a privilege when someone allows us to walk through that with them
Yeah.
and help them in any way that we can. And if we don't have the answer, and sometimes we don't, we will find it.
Yeah. And I agree. I think, like, even going to court for something like a speeding ticket
Oh
or
my goodness, yeah.
something, even like jury duty, it's such a nerve-wracking experience in some ways, where there's so many nuances, you don't want to make a mistake, so imagine on top of that having to
Exactly.
if you go for the temporary PFA, my understanding is that you don't have to face your abuser. You're just essentially sharing your information. The court reviews it and then either grants or denies it. But when you're going back for the final PFA, when you're really trying to, share that information, that you may have to face your abuser and have to speak on those things in front of them, in front of other people. So, it can be really nerve-wracking. So again, just having that kind of guide or support with
Mhm.
you through the process.
The temporary, and you are correct, it's the final where you will face, face your accuser. But it's really the temporary that is the real big step, because well, first of all, statistically, it's proven that most homicides
Mhm.
related to domestic violence occur once a temporary PFA has been filed.
Hmm,
Um, because that's when the abuser actually realizes that they are losing control.
that makes
And
sense.
so, when the survivor comes in, and they know that,
Hmm.
they know that there's so many unknowns, what's he going to do? It's what keeps a lot of people from filing,
Yeah.
is just being gripped with fear,
Yeah.
how their abuser is going to respond.
Yeah. And that is a rational fear too, because they say that
Absolutely.
even for the first 2 years after somebody chooses to leave a relationship, that the possibility of violence escalating increases by like 75% or something insane, which still blows my mind to this day every time I think about it. But, considering that a lot of times the question with survivors is, well, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just, do this, do that? But it's so much easier to say to somebody than actually being in that scenario and having to take steps for yourself. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we mentioned a little bit about the temporary PFA, the final PFA. How long does the PFA last?
Well, let me just real quick, if you don't
Yeah,
mind,
please.
Juanita,
Yeah.
because Marilyn had a question and I'm glad she
Oh, I
asked
missed it.
it.
Thank you.
The question is, this should be extremely hard for the ladies who can't speak English, walking in
Yes.
the courtroom and trying to get the information they need to get the
Yes.
protection. It's not a question, but I'm glad she brought that up, because I
Yes.
should have mentioned it, at the start, is we do have two bilingual advocates. And we always have at least one in Lehigh and one in Northampton. And that is such a correct statement, more than anybody can realize. It's not even just Spanish speaking, it's all the different languages that are coming
Arabic,
through. And
Mandarin. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And I don't know, it's just it's heartbreaking. And we again go the extra mile for everyone. But in that particular situation, we're very sensitive to that. And again, in advocating, it's important to raise awareness to others within the system.
Hmm.
Even just working with one particular client, sometimes you got to pull back, and someone and say, hey, listen, this is, but imagine not understanding anything
Yes.
going on, and then being able to communicate it again. And even when you are communicating it, there's each county, by the way, is responsible for providing an interpreter. Okay,
Correct.
that doesn't come from Turning Point. We have bilingual advocates to do our job, as I said, to support and walk through that process, but it's up to the county to provide an interpreter. But I've worked, I'm sure, Jess, we all have, with survivors who the translator was great, right? But this, you can't translate what somebody is actually feeling.
Hmm.
And you talk about nuances again, how they're saying something. And so yeah, so we are, as advocates, as best we can, very attuned to that. Um, and we have great relationships, and that I'm very proud of, with the interpreters of both counties, because they're all really great. But again, even with the best interpreters, you still cannot interpret how somebody's feeling
Yeah.
and how they're saying it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad she brought that up.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned it because I didn't even catch it. So thank you. But yeah, and I know that both courthouses, to my recollection, have some kind of interpreted or translated document out front of the office so that, that they understand that they do have the rights to an interpreter, that they can still access
Mhm.
the protection orders if needed. So that at least is there. I know that Turning Point, we've been really, adamant about making sure that we also have, a translated document kind of explaining our services, understanding that we do use a language line option, for interpretation over the helpline. So if anyone were to ever need us who doesn't speak English or English isn't their first language and they would feel more comfortable with an interpreter, they can always call and speak directly in the language that they know that they're comfortable in, and we can help get that interpreter connection. Because you're right, it
Yeah.
can be really daunting on
And
top.
the administrative offices of the Pennsylvania courts,
Mhm.
on their website have documents translated in every language.
Yeah.
So if there's one we don't have at the office, which we do, but if there's one come across that we don't, we can go right on that website and download that for the client.
Yeah. Myra said something important to consider when we're helping a Spanish speaking victim is the fact that Spanish has many variations, and depending on the culture, the meaning of the words may be significantly different. And you are absolutely correct. That
Mm-hmm.
is huge with Spanish because there are so many countries that speak Spanish, but even other, nations, other dialects, there's so many different. So that's
Yeah.
why that
The
interpretation
the
piece is important.
again, the AOPC administrative offices of Pennsylvania courts,
Hmm.
they held the funding was through stop grant, but they held in different regions. Northampton County hosted one here for Lehigh and Northampton, and you know in the surrounding areas, and for interpreters.
Hmm.
And I could tell you that was one of the best training days I've had in many, many years. It was the panelists
That's awesome.
of interpreters, and they were ones that we work with, Lehigh, through Northampton, very well regarded, very well respected, hardworking. But wow, they went through each one of their languages, and just as is it Maryland? Oh, Myra, I'm sorry, Myra, pointed out that just even the different phrases, and
Mhm.
it was just so interesting. And even names, they went into um names, so we get a lot of names that'll be hyphenated or not even hyphenated, just three or four names, and they explained how that goes through their father's name, their married name, their middle name. It was incredible. So
Maybe this
um
is a good kind of segue too to discuss, anyone who is not necessarily a citizen. So I will start by saying that, if somebody is either not from this area, not a citizen currently, whether that be through a visa, undocumented, whatever the case is, they can still access Turning Point services. So I just want to state that out there that you do not have to be a citizen, you do not have to be English speaking to receive our services. You do not have to be of a certain gender identity, a certain sexual orientation, race, status, socioeconomic background. Like anyone and everyone can access our services. So I do just want to start by saying that. But as far as, anyone who might not be a citizen directly, can you talk a little bit more about that PFA process? And I see we have a
yeah, I was seeing that too. I
comment.
did want to
So let me read a little bit through this. If we want to, do we want to go to the comment in the chat?
Oh, absolutely. If we
Okay.
want to just finish up real quick with
Yeah,
PFA
let's
though,
do it. And then
Honey O
we'll,
10,
yep.
I know the one question you had is how long does a PFA
Yeah.
last?
Hmm.
And so PFAs, if a final PFA is granted, the
Hmm.
standard used to be a year.
Okay.
And so that has been for at least the last 5 years, the bumped up, we see a lot of 3-year PFAs granted.
Mhm.
You can see 5 months, you can see a year, again, depending on the circumstances and the testimony. But for the most part, we see a lot of 3 years granted.
Okay. So
Don't
there's
see more,
the emergency PFA, which I would get after hours if the court system is closed, and
and
that
that's only good until the following business day at 8 a.m.
okay.
And that's even if you, again, I emphasize business day because if you get one on Friday evening, you need
Right.
to get to the courthouse the next business day. Sometimes there's a holiday on a Monday.
It's true.
That's
It's true.
on Tuesday, but a judge, again, when you're there, they'll put that on the paperwork.
That is true. Okay. And then
And
the
then
temporary lasts until the final PFA hearing
the
is
final PFA,
held,
which,
or if somebody chooses to withdraw, then
right, and they have to be scheduled within 10 days.
okay.
And so you'll usually see that schedule. Jess, I don't know if you, I'm sorry if you wanted to say something.
It's 10 business days.
Okay.
Right.
And that's written in the law, in the PFA law. They must be scheduled within 10 business days because since the temporary PFA is done in what we call ex parte, one party,
Mm-hmm.
um, you're taking away somebody's rights
Mm,
for those 10 days. So they wrote it in the law that it needs to be
within that 10-day
within
period.
10 days. Now it can get continued
Right.
through the court process, but the initial at the temporary filing day needs to be scheduled within 10 business days.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I don't know if you want to quickly address the other concept
Yeah.
of if somebody is not necessarily a citizen, can they still get a PFA? How do, does that process differ for them?
Process is no different.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
No,
just
they
as
just
we,
come in and file.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are protections in place for everyone. Nobody should live with abuse.
Yeah.
No one. Um and so Jess, did you read Kara's question? Because I was hoping you could speak to
Well,
that.
Myra just had a question about the 10 days. No. When you come in and file the PFA, the final hearing must be scheduled within 10 days of the filing.
Right.
Um, the
So you
abuse,
can choose,
you can file whenever to
right,
file.
you can choose to file at whatever point you feel
Right.
comfortable, you feel ready. That is up to you. But yes, from there, it's up to the courts then have 10 days to continue that process. So just to clarify that, I'm glad you asked that.
Yeah, I'm glad she asked that also. It's from when you come in the temporary. By
Mhm.
law, the courts have to have that final scheduled within 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they do, if they do continue, extend out of 10 days on certain circumstances, such as what we see a whole lot of is if the defendant wasn't served. They have to be served notice of the PFA and the PFA hearing. And so if the sheriff goes out to serve this temporary PFA hearing with a date that they need to show up for the final,
Right.
if they're not served, the sheriff can't find them. What'll happen is it'll just get continued
Right.
to the next court date and then the next until they're able to find the defendant,
Well, depending on the county.
depending on the
Lehigh
county.
County schedules it out until they're served. So you don't
Okay.
have to keep coming back. Northampton County usually schedules you out 2 more weeks.
Mhm.
And then after like the third time, then they'll do it for a few months.
Okay. Gotcha. So I guess going back to Kara's
Yeah.
question, which is good because it does bring back kind of the concept of how, custody might kind of make this a more complex process. But the question is, I know that Turning Point focuses on intimate partner violence, but what options are available for a child of abuse when the spouse, survivor, the mom has aligned themselves with the abuser? So in the concept where maybe there are other guardians or other relatives who may have partial guardianship of the child, how can we protect the child of abuse to make sure that they are still covered under that action order and sure that they are
So
still not abused?
I'm going to let Jess speak to that, but what I want to say to Kara is she is so not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm.
She is not alone. So go ahead,
Absolutely
Jess,
not.
if you want to speak to that, because it's not uncommon.
No, I have worked with quite a few people, grandmothers, grandfathers in here filing on behalf of their grandchildren.
Mhm.
Um, so you can file a PFA if you were filing against somebody who's a family member, um, either blood or marriage. So if mom and stepdad, you can file a PFA against stepdad. Um, Sometimes you can file a PFA if it's a live-in boyfriend, but that gets a little iffy. Kind of depends on what judge you go in front of, because it does say household member,
Mm-hmm.
but it depends on the judge if they what they feel as a household member. Um, for children, there's also what is called a protection from intimidation.
Mm-hmm.
So you file that on behalf of a child under the age of 18
Mm-hmm.
against a person over the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
It's roughly the same thing as a PFA, just you don't have to have any actual relationship with the person, and it has
Mm-hmm.
to be filed on behalf of a child against an adult.
So the adult guardian is essentially filing for the child,
Yes.
but it has
Yeah.
to be
You have to
against
be
another
18 years
adult.
old to file for a PFA or any kind of protection.
Okay.
So if there's somebody who has custody, guardianship, anything like that, that person has to file if it's a minor you're filing for.
Is a PFI always for a minor?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That is good to know. I I hope that kind of answers the question, but if there are other clarifications or things that, you want us to mention, please feel free. This is our conversation space. This is where we, talk about some of these nuances. So, and I know it can be one of the extra pieces that Kara mentioned is that sometimes even with a protection order that, law enforcement doesn't come when called, which is really unfortunate. And, you know,
Well,
um,
a lot of times law enforcement will say if they're calling or like the contact, if it's calling, social media messages, text messages, they're going to tell you to come in and file your own violation.
mm,
If the person is physically at your residence or somewhere that you are and they're not supposed to be, then they will show up.
mm,
But again, the person still has to be there when the police show up for them to arrest them. The police need to physically see the person in violation of the order to make an arrest.
okay. So if it's just through communication that the abuse is happening through text, through calling, whatnot, then that would just be filing a contempt of the order. But then if they are physically in person, then that's when you might call law enforcement to help
Yeah.
enforce that.
And it's the same penalties whether you file it or law enforcement files it.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. A question came up. Well, I guess let's finish this conversation. Can a family member without legal custody file for a protection from intimidation on behalf of the minor child against an abuser who's over 18? So if you don't
Um,
have legal custody, can you still file for the PFI, the protection from intimidation?
that's kind of a it depends answer.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
Now,
call the helpline so we can talk to you in person.
Yeah.
no, it's just a come in, try. But if there's another person, because sometimes one person will come in, say, grandma will come in filing against mom's boyfriend for the child,
Mhm.
but dad's fully involved in the child's life, and then dad should really be the one filing.
Mhm.
But if the child doesn't have anyone else, it can be any family member. We've had
Right.
sisters and brothers filing on behalf of their siblings. We've had aunts and uncles filing on behalf of a child
Mhm.
against a parent. It depends.
There's so many
You can
situations.
file. It just depends if it's going to get granted by the judge.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unique situations, right? And that's where PA safe law comes in. If there's, people are overnight because they can't sleep, and so they're trying to find resources, and we'll put that link out there, but if we haven't already. Um, but I always encourage, I never discourage anybody from filing for a PFA of
Mhm.
any type. And the worst case scenario is it'll be denied.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But in unique situations such as this, you go and file and it goes in front of a judge. Um, they do listen to that. They listen to and judges, when children are involved, it seems to really get their ear.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
so, explaining again, every situation's unique. And the judge will ask questions. And if there's a way that a judge cannot grant, they offer resources, believe it or not.
Other
Um,
avenues on how to.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And some judges actually have gotten off the bench because they, like us, are mandated reporters
Mhm.
and have made calls to children and youth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
And
actually just
so,
had that the other day.
what's that?
I had the judge actually call somebody
Yes,
from
yeah,
the bench.
from the
Mm.
bench, yeah. And so, again, I feel bad, like Kara, like I could just see from her emails, she's desperate to help her grandchild. And again, there is help out there. There are resources, and we can figure it out. Figure it out.
Oh, listen, we
With that.
can get you in touch with the people you need to speak to.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for, yeah. I know that things always get a bit more complex, especially when there's things like custody involved, divorce, right? That
Yes.
there's so many overlapping legal scenarios that it's hard to give just one, piece of advice for everyone because again, not everyone's situation is the same, but really the bottom line is never be afraid to file, never be afraid to ask for
That's
help.
right.
Like we're
That's right.
here to help guide
Mhm.
through the process.
Mhm.
And ultimately we want people to be as safe as possible. And that's the bottom line. So
Yeah.
there was another question that came in. Can we touch base on the process of an emergency PFA if it's a weekend or late at night and the court is closed and the victim needs a PFA? What does that look like? How as a survivor would I get an emergency PFA if needed?
Okay. Well, I didn't know if you wanted to speak on that, Jess, but what I'll say is this.
Yeah.
I see a lot of emergency PFAs is where the police are involved because they happen after hours during the night. Um, but with but they also happen at the end of the day when the court isn't accepting anymore and they need that emergency right there. So they go to the on-call magistrate. So the process is they would go in front of a magistrate, an on-call magistrate, and apply for the emergency. Again, it's similar to a temporary, just not as intensive. It's just basically this is what's happening, and this is why I feel I need protection until the morning.
Mhm.
Um, and so if the judge grants it, you have it physically, but also your local police department gets a copy faxed to them of the emergency PFA. And it is explained that you have to go to the courthouse on the next business day. About 8 o'clock, the courthouse is open to file for the temporary. If it's a weekend or late night, so court is never closed in that they have an on-call magistrate. And if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you were to call 911, they would direct you to that. If not, well, I'm sure they would send a police officer out to the house, especially if you're needing an emergency PFA. But whether it's the weekend, later night or if the courthouse is closed, you still again have access to an emergency PFA via an on-call magistrate who rotates that throughout the counties, the on-call magistrates. So you always have access to it.
How would
Um,
how would I find who my on district or on how do I find my
well,
magistrate?
well, actually, you would call either the non-emergency
Mm-hmm.
or 911 where they would direct you, but we personally have a list of the local magistrates. But
Mm-hmm.
you can also go on to the county websites in
Mm-hmm.
Northampton County or Lehigh, and they can direct you to the list of local magistrates, and it shows you their areas.
So yeah, because they're all kind of sectioned off right into
They
larger
yes,
county, and then in between there's the different
yes,
magistrates. So
yeah,
Well, because in Lehigh County, after 12:15,
mm-hmm.
you have to file with your local magistrate. So either you go your local magistrate until like 4 o'clock, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would be the on-call after the magistrate's office closes.
Mm-hmm.
And Northampton County is after 2:15.
Okay.
Between 2:15 and 4 o'clock, you go to your local magistrate. After that is the on-call.
Okay. Oh, Marlena, you're muted.
thank you. I'm sorry about that. Each county has what's called central court. There are times if you come in right like a razor hair after that, that they may allow you to go down to the central court because there's usually a
Lehigh County, you
magistrate
can
down
do
there.
central court till 3 o'clock for
Right,
appeal.
right.
I like how
So,
quick you guys are with these facts.
so
Northampton
there's,
County, we haven't had anybody do one over
yeah,
here. And it's just, we just haven't had anybody do it.
Mm-hmm.
right.
But
But
there are resources, there are options.
Absolutely.
there's
Absolutely.
options. And again,
And if your local magistrate is the one in central court, that's where you're going to go see them
yeah.
because they rotate.
But again, I know Pontiota, you put our hotline number down there. Again, if you call that and put someone will put you in touch with a legal advocate that can answer these questions quickly.
Mhm.
There it is again, just for everyone, so you have it. So just, I guess to kind of wrap things up, because I know we're running out of time, and I know this conversation could, I say this every time, but it's true, like this conversation really could go for hours because there are so many things to cover. But do you have any, safety tips or just in general advice that you might give to somebody who is going through abuse, to a supportive friend or family member that really wants to support the survivor?
Well, we both can answer that. Jess, if
Yeah,
you want to go
yeah,
first.
go for it.
Uh,
No pressure.
yeah, right.
Or I can go first. I just always, me personally, I just feel a sense of urgency always. Like um my advice is to always never downplay
Mm,
and always seek assistance
yeah.
and guidance. I don't know if your question was for a friend or what it was for, but
It's in
my
general.
advice is nothing is too small. I believe not everything's in a crisis situation, but everybody's situation needs to be heard
Hmm.
and needs to be evaluated. I mean, even if it's a self-evaluation, okay, like of your situation, it's just speaking with somebody, talking it through, somebody who can hear things objectively. Because the reality, I mean, the abuse is coming from someone we love.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, somebody that we've invested time in, somebody that we've had a dream of a future with.
Yeah.
Okay. And especially if there's children involved. We work with a lot of parents
Mhm.
that are coming in against their children. So it's always someone that we love. And it's an extremely difficult situation, a lot of difficult decisions that need to be made. Um, but it's just, and people feel so isolated, not realizing that mostly every one of us, I can guarantee every one of us here, are affected in some way, shape, or form. And while we feel judged, just take that chance,
Mhm.
take that chance, and reach out.
Thank you. Jess, any other thoughts?
To make sure you're not alone. You
Mhm.
might feel like you're alone when you're going through it. You're not alone. And like Marlena said, don't minimize it. Don't think that your situation, because X, Y, and Z is happening to you, but somebody's, being beaten in the middle of the street, their situation is worse than yours. You're the only one that can determine how bad your situation is.
Yeah.
So, however bad it feels to you is how bad it is. Don't compare yourself to someone else. Your situation is your own, and only you can determine how bad it is. And we're here to help walk you through it all.
Yes. Yeah. So we have two comments briefly in the chat. So Myra said, for future webinars, it would be helpful to talk about the U visa, which in most cases grants legal documentation to victims of abuse in the USA, regardless of their country of origin,
Mhm.
which yes, absolutely. There is like we said, there's so much in regards to immigration,
Yeah.
and survivors of abuse, but yes, there are legal avenues to support survivors of abuse who may not have a current visa, may be undocumented, whatever the case is.
Mhm.
So again, please feel
I
free to reach
saw,
out. You are still worthy of that support, and there are
absolutely.
resources out there for you if that applies to you.
And I
Um,
saw that comment, before she put that comment up, I was going to say at the end,
mhm.
as you said, there's just always so much to talk about. I support anybody that's listening to reach out to you with
Yeah.
suggestions or recommendations or things they'd like to hear for a future
Yes,
conversation
please.
with us.
That's really what we're here for. There was one last comment that said, take serious any threat, don't downplay it. If they say it, it's because they mean it. Don't be afraid to start over and remember your children are safer outside of that environment. Absolutely. Thank you guys for joining us. On the screen, you'll see just some brief reminders, some extra resources if you want to take a picture, screenshot, whatever the case is. Again, we are here to help support. So we have the Turning Points resource, we have the Lehigh and Northampton County resources, the District Attorney's Office, protection from abuse or family court offices. And again, just reach out.
Mhm.
We're here for you. We're here to help. One last thing I just want to mention, shameless plug, is that we do have our annual vigil event coming up next week, which is our really big outreach event, but it also is just a really impactful evening where we have some of our survivors come and speak, share their stories. And it's just a night of hope, of honoring those who have been impacted by abuse in some way, shape, or form. So we hope you can join us. That is at First Presbyterian Church in Bethlehem, and next Thursday. So, but again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to all of you for, making
Yes.
this work meaningful as well, for being here to let us talk for an hour about these things.
Yeah, thank you for everyone's time and attention. It's our pleasure. It really, really, truly is.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And yeah, stay safe. We're here if you need. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Excuse
you. Have a great day.
See ya. Thank you.